Joining me now is Michael Cohen, former personal attorney to Donald Trump, who just appeared as a key witness in the former president's first criminal trial in New York. He's the author of the books Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the Department of Justice Against His Critics, and Disloyal, a memoir. Michael is also the host of the podcasts Mea Culpa with Michael Cohen and Political Beatdown. Michael Cohen, good to see you, my friend. Thank you for being with us.
It's good to see you.
You and I have been talking about this particular topic for a long time, and it relates to you very, very specifically. It's not a general thing. At one point, you had been in Otisville, you were in prison there. You were let out during COVID,
right,
to home confinement.
Correct.
And you were called in, I believe, to an administrative.
I was called into 500 Pearl Street in order to sign what's called the Federal Location Monitoring Agreement, which is in order to have either an ankle monitor or a telephone placed upon.
So that's this. It's a document. It's pro forma. Generally, it's got a bunch of things on it that you would agree to do.
Sure.
Right.
It contains a specific federal ID number at the top left corner of the document.
But this isn't actually what you were brought to sign. This is
correct.
A separate document which has something that the official document doesn't have. I'm going to read it. It commits you to saying you will have no engagement of any kind with the media, including print, TV, film, books, or any other form of media and news. Prohibition from all social media platforms, no posting on social media, and requirement that you communicate with friends and family to exercise discretion in not posting on your behalf or posting any information about you. The purpose is to avoid glamorizing or bringing publicity to your status as a sentenced inmate serving a custodial term in the community. That's highly specific to you, Michael Cohen. This is not what other people sign.
In fact, the whole document is specific to me. I don't think that there are any of the same paragraphs in the legitimate one as it relates then to the counterfeit. And so my refusal to sign the counterfeit document resulted in approximately 1 hour later, after appearing at 500 Pearl Street before two members of the Bureau of Prison, part of the Department of Justice, Adam Pakula and Enid Phoebus, I was then met by three marshals who then provided my lawyer, who was with me, Jeffrey K. Levine, friend of mine, because none of this seemed to make any sense at all. And I was remanded back to Otisville for another 15 days of solitary confinement.
So you didn't sign this, and they threw you in jail. You didn't sign a thing that said that you would not communicate. And I want to understand, because this was then adjudicated in court. And in the decision, the judge said the court finds that respondents, that's you, respondent's purpose in transferring. Respondent is.
Government.
The government. The court finds that the respondent's purpose in transferring Cohen from release on furlough and home confinement back to custody was retaliatory in response to Cohen desiring to exercise his First Amendment rights to publish a book critical of the president and to discuss the book on social media. Accordingly, respondents are hereby enjoined from any continuing or future retaliation against Cohen for exercising his First Amendment rights. So you were vindicated.
Well, I was vindicated in the fact that I was released after another 15 days of solitary confinement, making it 51 days in total. That to me is not vindication. That to me was I was thankful for it. I shouldn't have been there in the first place. The vindication is to put a stop once and for all to what I know Donald Trump was behind. There is no way that Enid Phoebus or Adam Pakula or a guy named Patrick McFarland, who's an RRM over at MDC, you'll see there's the remand order. There's no way that these three concocted this. This came right from the top. And the only way to be vindicated is to make sure that they don't use this process on people like you, on other people who they deem to be critics, whether it's members of Congress, whether it's the media, whether it's Supreme Court judges, whether it's
district
people
attorneys,
like
attorneys general, jurors.
Everybody, jurors, witnesses, no matter anyone that Donald Trump deems to be a critic. He will be able to use this. I said it on when we did that over a year ago, that this is a test run. And now he knows exactly what he can get away with. And he has advanced this. And he's already dictating and he's already projecting what he intends to do if, God forbid, a million times he ends up becoming president.
This is illustrative. That's why I wanted to use it, because it's specifically what happened to you. But your point is that I don't know. They got lists. They're saying it. They go on TV and they say, we're going to go after media. We're going to go after critics. We're going to go after the January 6th committee should be jailed. Alvin Bragg should be jailed. What is this about? This is not a country in which you go around and say people should be jailed. Of course they did, right? With Hillary Clinton. Lock her up.
Yes, but
they literally just say people should be jailed.
I sit and I listen to a lot of the pundits. They talk, in my opinion, there is no opinion here. There is no that I'm thinking about it. The documents speak for themselves. It is plain and simple that what he has done, he intends to do again. And he is telling you in advance what he intends to do. You're not safe. Guys like Bezos or Elon Musk, they think that they are safe. No. Trump wants total power over the United States of America, including their wealth. He will do exactly what Mohammed bin Salman did when he jailed all of his relatives at the Ritz there in Riyadh. Donald will take their wealth. He will take their power. He will take everything. No member of Congress is safe. No one is safe because, again, the documents speak for themselves. Why do people not acknowledge that this happened to me? Mm-hmm. And if it happened to me, it will happen to you.
Right, because you're full of Donald Trump secrets. You know all the stuff. You're actually a dangerous guy for Donald Trump.
Which is why they ended up doing this. Look, at the end of the day, he was right for trying to get me to do this. Look at what happened as a result of my 2019 testimony before the House Oversight Committee. That was one of 7. Look at what happened with the New York Attorney General case with the civil, $500 million. Look at what's now happened with the Manhattan District Attorney case. He knew that I would be an issue to him. And so what did he decide to do? Lock them up.
Yep.
And that's exactly what they did.
And
but
silence you. The more important thing than locking you up is it was actually an effort to silence you.
Well, not more important to me. Locking you up.
I understand. I understand.
Really
locked
terrible.
Up is bad. But that's the goal, right? The goal is if you lock a few people up, the rest of us will take the lesson and we'll stop. Hold on there. I want to take a quick break. Got to pay the bills. We'll be right back. Michael Cohen is staying with me. Interesting point you make. We've got brand new graphics in here. Studio looks really nice.
I've
got my name on it. We're allowed to say anything we want to do. We criticize. I criticize governments all over the world, including here in America, which is what we do and what we are protected in doing by the First Amendment. You're making the case that all of that kind of stuff is in peril. We could be in a situation, if Donald Trump is president, in which the news is news that is censored, a news that is complimentary of the government.
State-sponsored news, just like what you have in Russia with their stations called Pravda, which means truth, which is ironic, right? All of this goes away under a Donald Trump administration. Why? Because he doesn't want to hear anything negative being said about him. The fact that you have this television show, the fact that you do have that ability to speak truth to power, all of that goes away if, in fact, this man ends up becoming president. And the part that I am the most offended by are those members of Congress and others who are supporting this type of conduct, this rhetoric, this behavior, because the only reason that they even have the positions that they have is because of the First Amendment, which Donald Trump does not believe in. And how do we know he doesn't believe in it?
Explain to me a Mike Johnson.
Because he wanted to violate
mine. Who doesn't need Donald Trump. People should have faith in their own power to get elected, to say to their constituents, I represent you well. So tell me what the calculus is, that I'm going to support Donald Trump, even though I probably think that some of the stuff he says is outlandish and crazy, because I will be more empowered if he gets reelected.
So, Ali, first of all of these people, whether it's Marco Rubio, Mike Johnson, Mark Meadows, have all said disparaging things at one point in time about Donald. Ted Cruz, the same thing. They believe that if Donald Trump wins and they are shoulder to shoulder with him, that they will have unlimited power, which would, of course, give them the ability to make or to have unlimited resources and assets. One mistake that they are making, Donald Trump doesn't share. It's all about him, not about his kids, not about his family. It is all about him. So if they think that they're going to hitch themselves to his wagon in hopes that they're going to elevate themselves, whether it's through power, through money, through connections and so on, it doesn't work that way. He will not allow them. And just like Putin, once you start to get too big for your own britches, people will start flying out of windows. They will start like Navalny. They will end up in gulags. They will end up, as Donald says all the time, send them to Gitmo. Send them to Guantanamo Bay.
And by the way, he spoke about Mark Milley talking about being executed. I mean, at some point, it sounds exaggerated, and you don't want to make, I don't want my viewers thinking we lose our heads over these things, except what happens when he comes into power, he puts these loyalists into office, and they start to do these things. I mean, what happens to you? What happens to you? Because they tried everything to get to you. You have now been a key witness in a criminal conviction of the President of the United States. And a civil. In the first time ever for a former or sitting President of the United States. What do you think about if Donald Trump wins again?
Well, I'm certainly
You're thinking about your Canadian family members.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or I have family in other parts of the country, too, that I won't disclose. Maybe I'll figure out how to get out there. But he's already said that he intends to use SEAL Team 6, to start rounding up his political enemies. There's no doubt in my mind that I'm somewhere at the top of that list. I don't think, you're not at the top of the list, but you're certainly on that list as well, as is the president of MSNBC, General Mark Milley, Mike Pence, Hillary Clinton, the entire Biden family. This is not a joke. And the fact that he is even considered to be the Republican nominee, one of our two political parties, is it should be so offensive to everyone in this country. A man who doesn't believe in the very First Amendment to the Constitution. And by the way, all of these folks that think Donald Trump is the key to the Second Amendment, that he's our Second Amendment guy, what do dictators do on day number one? When they become the autocrat, the monarch, the Führer, the supreme leader? You round up all the weapons because you don't want a militia. You don't want civilians being able to get together to create a militia against you. These autocracies don't have free-flowing weapons like we have in America.
Let's talk about the rich folks who have been lining up behind Donald Trump. First of all, he's gone out and he said the things that we know happen in politics. He's basically said, you donate to me, I get elected, I'll deregulate, and you guys can do what you want. It's a bit of a shakedown. But a lot of them, including Steve Schwarzman, the founder of a major financial firm, have said they want to support him. Again, I go back to your Russia example, right? The rich folks supported Putin because it would make them richer until it didn't, until it stopped. It was a great gravy train until it stopped.
Right. And when it stops, there's only one way to make it stop for these folks. It's either incarceration, like what we saw with Navalny, or some of the oligarchs that, things are so bad for them. The guy's worth 28, 30, 40 billion dollars. It's not easy, being worth that sort of money. And so they all decided, to jump out of windows. I mean, the whole thing is preposterous, and Americans have to take a look at what's going on because Donald Trump is a copycat. He wants to be. It's why he's so attracted to autocrats, to the Vladimir Putins, to the Mohammed bin Salmans, to the Kim Jong-uns, and the Erdogans. This is what he wants to be, and he wants to convert America. He wants to destroy our democratic republic and turn it into an autocracy for his benefit. It is so crystal clear. And the fact that members of Congress, many members of Congress, have seen these documents.
Right.
I have spoken to them about it. In fact, 4 years ago, Hakeem Jeffries and Ted Lieu wrote a letter to the IG asking for an investigation to be opened regarding the unconstitutional remand of a United States citizen to prison because he failed to waive a First Amendment constitutional right.
Under which you have no obligation. You have no obligation to waive your First Amendment rights.
Of course not. This is so apparent, and why even this Biden administration, why Merrick Garland, why this is not front and center to expose and to counter narrative what Donald is saying every single day, which is that the Biden administration has weaponized the Justice Department against him, your favorite president.
These documents are the Trump administration. Biden was not the president of the United States.
These are all under the Trump administration. And the worst part, he's already, again, telling everyone what he intends to do. What he intends to do is this as a repeat.
Good to see you, Fred. Thank you for being with us again.
It's good to be able to be here.
There was a lot, but you and I have been talking about this for a long time. And when people say you're blowing it out of proportion, I say, please, Exhibit A, Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen is a former personal attorney to Donald Trump, author of the books Revenge and Disloyal. He's the host of Mea Culpa with Michael Cohen and Political Beatdown podcasts.